You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 530. This is going to be the first episode in a series of episodes that we've got planned here because we are we're on the cusp of beginning phase 3 of the High Republic. And it's been a while since we've talked about High Republic. You know, we've kind of left it up to Lauren to pick up where we left off with phase 2, but phase 3 is coming. And we'll get into exactly, Eye of Darkness and George Mann's novel here in a little bit. But this series of episodes is set for someone who may be interested in trying to get caught up on what they need to know from all the books and anything else that's come prior to this. So some of this will be kind of a refresher, but I think we've picked a couple of what I'm calling essential reads, if you will, for getting ready for phase 3. Not required by any means, not required, but I do feel like these are probably essential and they're just really good stories. So, and joining me tonight to do all of this is our resident bookworm and Star Wars expert, Lauren. Lauren, welcome to the show. How are you doing tonight?
I'm great. I'm excited to talk about The Blade. I read it for the second time and it was even better the second time. So that's awesome.
Great. Yeah. And this, we'll save it for a little bit here. It's been a while, honestly, since I've connected with the High Republic, and I kind of jumped both feet into Eye of Darkness, as well as Shadows of Starlight. But going back and reading this now, same thing. Like I had read it when it first came out. Didn't really think a whole lot of it. I enjoyed the story because of all the drama that we're going to get into here in a little bit, but I didn't think much of it. But it was just something about when this book came out, I was like, holy crap, we got to go back and revisit that. We got to talk about it. There's just some really good stuff in here that I think plays into Eye of Darkness. And if for no other reason, like I said, it's just a really well-crafted story by Charles Soule. But before we get into all that, I want to say thank you to all of our Patreon members, especially our now part of the tribe folks. So Rob, Mike Borda, Lauren, Dante, Riss Bayless, Justin, Jackson, Sharkman Dan, Isabella, Uncle Leon, Josh C, and Jacob. And then our Delusions of Grandeur members, Rod, CJ, Alex, Steve C, and Das. Thank you guys so much for your patronage. Head out to cantinacast.com/Patreon if you'd like to subscribe to the exclusive content. Everything starts at like $2 and goes up from there. And if you're watching us live or listening to this and you want to follow us on live, head out to cantinacast.com/YouTube. Make sure you like, subscribe, check out all Lauren's videos, all the stuff that she's doing every week to cover novels and comic books and anything else that's of print. And what do you got coming up? Speaking of which, what do you got that's most recently coming out? And then I know what you're working on next week because we're all excited about it, but what's coming out next week?
That's why I'm smiling. So, okay, Eye of Darkness comes out on Tuesday. And so I had to really think hard to not accidentally say Eye of the Storm just then. So not to be confused with Eye of the Storm, which is the phase 1 comic about Marchion Ro, but Eye of Darkness, the new novel by George Mann. I recently did a sneak peek about it where I kind of just gave people a little bit of a hint of what to expect. And I didn't get into very many details about it since it's not out yet, but I did give a sort of like key phase 3 reads that you need to do first before getting into Eye of Darkness. So I did kind of give a little list there, but I'm really excited to release the video of like the full plot synopsis and all of my thoughts and everything. So keep an eye out for that on Tuesday.
Yeah. And I think you and I are kind of both resounding thumbs up for Eye of Darkness.
Yeah.
Am I off base there?
100%. I mean, it really got me super excited about High Republic again. So yeah. I don't know. There was just something about it that just really, I felt like recaptured the magic of phase 1. So it's really having me very hopeful for the rest of phase 3.
Yeah. And I would echo the same thing. We've got something planned, something special planned to cover that book. But what I would say, because we can talk about it at this point, is I think I posted this on Twitter and tagged George Mann. He liked it, but I just felt like it was, like you said, it captured a lot of that same love that we had. Like I fell in love with the High Republic all over again. And I think it was because I've been yearning for those characters. I was so invested in those characters. And then we took this break to go back. And the entire time, although interesting, I still just felt like I really needed to get back. And the way they left things off with the fall of Starlight Beacon and getting some resolution there and finding out what was the fate of Boryaga and how are we dealing with Stellan being gone and Bell and what's going on with him. All of that gets answered and more in this book. But it's just crazy how well it picks up from phase one. It's just like a continuation. Like it almost like not a beat was missed in all of that. So it's a great book. We're going to talk more about it here. And if you're a High Republic fan, next week is a big week. You guys are not going to be disappointed. Wait till you get to chapter 11. That's the big one. So, all right.
Oh my God.
I know. I even
You
texted
got
Lauren.
me with that. Yeah.
I texted Lauren. I was like, wait till you get to chapter 11.
I was like, oh, great.
And then next week, so this will be The Blade. We're going to cover that comic book series tonight, of course. And then next week, Lauren and I will be back, and we're going to cover a story from Tales of Light and Life. All Jedi walk their own path. And this is the story that covers that fate of Boryaga, what happened, and all of that. So we won't spoil anything for that right now, but that is that story. Really great story. And I think that was Charles Soule as well, if I'm not mistaken. I forget now who wrote that one.
Yes.
I think it was.
I believe you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're on a Charles Soule 2-week binge here as far as that goes.
It's almost like he knows what he's doing.
Yeah. So, hey, and thanks for joining us tonight. Sky's with us tonight. And Ash, thanks for being here. Hey, Ash, Avar Chris, this is your book. I know you've been waiting, but this next book, she's in it.
Yeah. Some great Avar stuff.
A whole lot. Okay, so, all right. What else we got? Anything else? Hey, just quickly, a quick programming note. We have a show scheduled for Sunday. So Ed's going to be on here. We're going to try to get in a Waystation episode. I've got some personal things I may have a conflict with, and it's work related, nothing like weird or anything like that. So it's kind of tentative right now. We're going to try to reschedule if we have to, but we'll post right now it's scheduled, but I will post something and we'll send out communication via Patreon, Discord, and social media, just letting you guys know if we're not going to be able to do that. So last minute thing came up, so I do apologize for that. All right, let's get into The Blade. All right, so I'm going to read the synopsis for the 4-issue collection, and I think it does a pretty decent job of kind of explaining where we are, and then we'll talk about the writers and all that. So it says, hundreds of years before the Skywalker saga, witness the birth of a Jedi legend. Porter Engle is perhaps the most skilled lightsaber wielder in the High Republic. With his sister and fellow Jedi Knight Barash Sylvain, he travels the galaxy serving as a guardian of peace and justice. As the two Jedi journey to planet far on the Republic frontier in response to a desperate request for aid, they are certain they will succeed because no one in the galaxy fights like Porter Engle. No warrior can stand up against him, not even comes close. They are sure of a victory until they see what awaits him. So this was a comic series that came out in February of this year, 2023, 4 issues, written by Charles Soule, illustrated by Marco Casiello and Jethro Morales. And I think I went and looked I never really talked about when this takes place, but it looks like someone did the math, or maybe it came up in one of the interviews or panels or something, but it looks like it started around 382 BBY, which I think puts us just after the events of the peace treaty that we learn about in phase 2 between Irem and Irano. So, and if you're familiar with phase 2, it's a huge setting. I mean, everything is kind of centered around the love, I don't know, what was it? The Romeo and Juliet story that was brewing in there. And then just the peace treaty that was happening between those two groups. So we're not going to get into all that, but that's just kind of as far as the setting goes. All right, so I've done enough talking, but I guess we're going to do some non-spoiler thoughts about the series, just in case anybody's still interested in reading this or hasn't gotten around to it. And then we'll get into the full breakdown and spoilers. But what are your non-spoiler thoughts about this particular comic series? What did you think about it?
Well, one thing that I felt like really set this series apart is the fact that even if you're not reading all of High Republic, or even if you haven't read any High Republic, I feel like this story still stands on its own and you're still able to kind of follow what's going on. And I still really like what it's overall saying, even separate from the rest of the High Republic context.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was one reason that I felt like this was a particularly strong read from phase 2. Also just the fact that Porter is just such a cool character. Like even that alone, like it's just fun watching somebody just absolutely kill it with a lightsaber, and there's a lot of that happens in this comic. So, I mean, I got a lot of entertainment out of it, and I also really liked some of the deeper questions that it gets into with some of the things that Porter and Barash are going through throughout this story.
Yeah. And same thing. Like the story is self-contained in that way. You know, like you said, it almost has like these barriers around it that it's all happening. It's so far in the past and it's so far in the far reaches of space that they really do get to kind of play around with a lot of things in the story. I love what it did for Porter Engle. I knew Porter Engle as the soup maker, right? As the chef. And then suddenly turns badass. And by the time we get to the High Republic and even in Light of the Jedi, right, he's doing some incredible things, but he's much older then. And he's
Yeah.
portrayed as being like this, still got it, but not maybe like he used to. And I'm thinking, man, if this is how he is now, what was he like before? Well, we get that context in the series. Like this, he's doing things in this, and we'll talk about it in more detail, but he's doing things. And I know this may sound sacrilegious, but they're on the level of Anakin Skywalker. Like there are few Jedi that I've even like read about or seen doing the things that he does with the lightsaber, and he almost feels like this one trick. We're going to get into Porter Engle a little bit. Where I don't. I'll kind of save it for that.
He
Uh,
definitely has the reputation like Anakin, I'll just say that. In a
a-
good way,
in a good way,
not in a
yeah.
bad way.
Definitely feared, definitely renowned. There's a scene a little bit in one of them where he just runs into another Jedi and he's like, "Oh man, I've heard of you," and they kind of duel, that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
he's you can definitely see you see his reputation building here in this first story. The other thing I liked, it was subverting expectations all the time. Like as many times as I thought, oh, okay, I know where this story's going. I've already figured this one out. It would change, and even at the very end, it's like, oh, there's a couple of twists, and then it gets super dramatic. It's like on the car with like a novella, like a Mexican novella at the very end, where everybody's like, "You're sleeping with who?" and so and so. I mean, it felt like it was just over the top, and not in a bad way, but just in a really good way. Like, whoa, wow, this is like a soap opera almost of sorts. I
Mhm.
wasn't expecting the way some of the things turned out to happen at the very end. So in that regard, I thought it was great because a lot of times you read comics and it's just cookie cutter and it's very predictable. Definitely wasn't the case with this story. So definitely enjoyed that. Let's see what else. And then I think the other question I have here is why are we recommending this story? Some of the characters that will come out in this story make their way into the Eye of Darkness, and it kind of recontextualizes the relationship of those characters in a better way, in a different way. And here's the other thing about this, and I want your thoughts too on what if you can think of anything else as far as why we would recommend this for Eye of Darkness. But this series also, the very end of it, it leaves off saying that Porter Engle will return in the Broken Blade. So there is another series that is coming from Charles Soule. I went and checked before we came on air, and it looks like it's still in development. It hasn't come out yet, of course. There's no timeline as far as I know. I would expect this to come out probably sometime next year. Probably makes sense given how long it's been since the Blade, and we'll be knee deep in phase 3. But if we're picking up with a lot of the same characters and some of the threads that are laid down at the very end, that's super exciting. Oh, I thought of one other thing that I really enjoyed about this without really spoiling much. We've heard of the Barash vow, and we've talked about it in comics. It's come up in the novelizations of The Last Jedi. But for anybody that doesn't know, that Barash vow is when a Jedi doesn't leave the Order, but they stop acting on behalf of the Jedi Order to go take a sabbatical, right? Go reconnect with the Force in some way, hide, go into exile, if you will. And we learn the origins of the Barash vow, how that comes to be, how it gets its name. Spoiler alert, right? Barash, I already said his sister's name. But yeah, that was kind of cool because it was something that was always talked about, and it was it was a novel concept at the time that's been explored in other media. But we really do get the origins of that Barash vow and what does that actually mean and why. So I thought that was really cool too. So if that's ever piqued your interest, this story does give you something it fills in the blanks. It kind of gives you the context as to why that came to be. But
I
anything else
was
that you'd say? Sorry.
Well, I was trying to remember what Elzar, I won't give too many details in case anybody hasn't read it, but what Elzar goes through in phase 1, do they call that when he does that, he kind of goes into exile for a little bit. Do they call that the Barash vow, or is it just kind of alluded to when
Mm,
Elzar does it?
yeah, man, it's been like 3 years. I don't remember if they did, but at least in principle, what he was doing seemed very similar. It seemed like it was on par.
Yeah.
because he wasn't active, right? And he was out there just, atoning for his sins, if you will, for such a long period of time. But I don't know. That's a really great question. I think the
Yeah.
only difference is he still had, was it Indira? Who was it? There was some, I can't remember now.
Orla Jareni was
Orla
with
Jareni,
him.
thank you. How could I
Yeah.
forget that? But yeah, I think she was still in contact and working with him. I think
She
the way I have
was.
interpreted this is more like Luke going out to an island somewhere, or Yoda exiling himself. Well, no, that's not really the same thing. But you know what I'm saying? Like going out somewhere, not letting anybody know where you are, cutting yourself off from the Force, outside of
Yeah.
your own personal connection kind of thing. I don't think that really happened with Elzar, but I mean, it was very similar in terms of, what he was
Yeah.
doing.
He at least had a serious regrouping moment where he needed
Right.
to get some things in perspective. So it's at least similar.
Yeah. But anything else that you would why we'd recommend this? Anything else that's covered in this series?
Well, just to add to what you were saying about the connections with the characters, that is a really important part of it that I think having that context, I mean, if you don't have the context, it's not like you're going to completely be lost. But I think having the context, it does really enhance the experience of reading Eye of Darkness and kind of all of the little twists and turns that it takes. And also understanding who Porter was in his prime. Because in phase one, it's hinted at that,
Right.
in his prime, he was really something else, but we don't see it happen on the page and we don't really get any examples of it. It's just alluded to. So it's cool to actually see that happen and then pick back up with him in phase three. And now you kind of have like a different understanding of where he's come from. So I think that alone is a really great reason to read this too.
Yeah, I'd agree there. Okay, so for at this point on, spoilers. So turn it off, do whatever you do if you're not ready for this, but we're going to get into the spoilers. And what I want to do is let's continue talking about Porter Engle. And so I think let's start there. Like this is a different character in a lot of ways when we see him. I don't know how old this guy is. He's like 500 and something years old, I think, or whatever. He's a Ikukurian. I don't even know if that's right.
Ikarukian.
Ikurukian. I can't remember. Yeah. They look like devils that had their horns chopped off in the front of in some way, or or like their goggles were just painted, or I don't know,
Yeah.
embedded in them, whatever. But yeah, I mean, this is a very different character. So the question for you, I think, is when you think of Porter Engle, thinking back to phase one, like, and I think I said chef already, but what are some of the other words that come to mind when you think about his character as he was portrayed during phase one?
Well, in phase one, you get the sense too, at the beginning of phase one at least, that he's just trying to have a peaceful life. Like he
Yeah.
was on that base. I forget what the planet was, but he was on that base just cooking. He just wanted to cook for people. He didn't really want to fight. And I guess honestly, not a lot has changed in that regard. He doesn't want to fight, but
True.
he's willing to do it when the situation requires it. And I think that is a key thing about him that sets him apart from some other characters, is that if it comes down to it, he doesn't hesitate once that time actually comes. But yeah, I mean, he just when we first met him, he was just very kind of just wanting to have a quiet life, and he had kind of, I guess you could say, he had hung up his blade in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Like it did feel like he certainly answered the call to action when everything started happening with the great disturbance and all that. But he is portrayed as someone who is like maybe past their prime, had the glory years. He had that moment, I think I forget which one it was, where he was kind of like surfboarding on the ships. You remember that, when he was like he was doing something crazy that everybody was like, holy crap, that's Porter Engle, he's back, kind of thing. And that was really, like, I wouldn't say that was the only, I think there was another moment too where he did something kind of extraordinary, but it was still tempered. It wasn't like what we saw here. I think one of the other key differences of his character from this comic book that I didn't really pick up on phase one is just, I don't know if it's arrogance. It's almost like it borders arrogance, but it's really just extreme confidence. Like the way he talks to people and the way he confronts people, it's like, you're going to lose. You don't know who I am. You have no idea who you're dealing with. It's almost like this Anakin Skywalker kind of, mentality when he approaches people or he approaches situations. And it's like backed up in every way.
You just took the words right out of my mouth. I was just about to say he can back it up.
He can back it up. And then you've got somebody like his sister Barash, who is many times in this comic book, there are moments in there where, she's talking to somebody else and they're like doubting what's going to happen because he's doing something. And she's like, no,
Just give him time.
just give
Yeah.
him time. He's going to do it. I know it seems incredibly, the odds are incredibly against him. There's almost no way out of this, but trust me, he's going to do it. And he does every single time. He figures it out. And that's why I say it's like, I don't know. I mean, it almost feels like it's over the top, but you got to, it is canon. So you got to respect the fact that he is pretty incredible. And we'll get into some of those exact moments and things here a little bit later. You had wrote down persistence as well. Maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so something that stood out to me in this comic is we do see multiple examples of him being persistent, and I think that's one thing that makes him special. Like it's like you said, I mean, he's over the top in what he's capable of doing, and he does seem invincible at times, but it's also hinted at that it wasn't always this way. Like
Mm,
there was a time in this comic where he mentioned that when he was in training, he was actually pretty below average when it came to lightsaber combat, but he got better at it. So he just kind of like, I get the idea that when he sees an obstacle in his way, he just works at it until he figures it out. Like he wasn't just born super good at this. He became super good at this because of his discipline and because of the persistence that that gave him. So I feel like that says a lot about his character also going forward. Like, if we're thinking about what we could see Porter do in phase 3, knowing that even when he's faced with some sort of a major challenge or obstacle, he sticks with it until he figures it out. That I think says a lot about where he could go as a character.
hmm. You're not spoiling anything for Eye of Darkness, are you? Or alluding to anything with Eye of Darkness, are you?
I am just talking about the blade right now.
I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
I mean, if you took something out of that, then
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Okay. Yeah, I would agree. All right. So the other character, one of the other characters, before we get into Barash, the other character that's introduced in this comic book is a character by the name of General Vice. And she is front and center, a primary character in Eye of Darkness. And we learn more about their relationship. She is his nemesis. And not so much, and it's very interesting. By the time we get to Eye of Darkness, I don't want to spoil anything, but they definitely have a relationship, and you learn more about their relationship, right? There's history there, in many, many years of history, because she's a Miralyn, and I forget how long they live, but I think they live longer than humans do. So
also a super long time. Yeah.
yeah, so they've been fighting forever, right? By the time we get to Eye of Darkness, and again, you'll get more when we get to the book. And this is their first meeting. It's like her first comic appearance, and it's a very one-sided battle. We'll get into the specifics a little bit later, but she has really nothing on him, right? And so it's very interesting that as powerful as he is, and as quickly as he kind of disperses her and her efforts, it's interesting that somehow she eventually gets a leg up on him, or is able to elude him, or vice versa, for so many years, hundreds of years, at this point between those two. But what did you think about her character a little bit, and then the relationship that they had in this comic?
Well, she is, I mean, one thing that struck me is that she really is a nihil at heart. Just the way that she goes about things and the way that she, like, her goals in this comic. I mean, obviously, this is phase 2, so the nihil don't exist yet, but there's times when, like, she's talking about doing absolutely horrible things to the innocent people living in this city just because she can.
Yeah,
I mean, she's a mercenary, so she doesn't have any sort of greater reason
allegiance,
for being here other than that she's just getting paid to do it.
right?
And she just wants to destroy whatever she can just for the fun of it. So that was one thing that really stood out to me about her. Also, she doesn't strike me as somebody that has been defeated very many times, because she has kind of that same arrogance thing going for her too. But I mean, she's not as likable as Porter, so it doesn't really hit the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she claims to be a Jedi killer, and she even says as much to Porter Engle. And we'll get into and he has a great retort, which I absolutely love, when she says, "I'm a Jedi killer." But as a Miralyn, as this mercenary, she's also somebody who has a Beskar spear. Doesn't look like the one that we saw from the Ahsoka series or from the Book of Boba Fett or whatever series. Mandalorian, sorry.
Just
Like, I
name
can't
all
remember.
of them.
They're
It's
all
good.
blended now. It doesn't look like that. It's a very elegant, or more, I don't know, extravagant spear that she has, but it's made of Beskar, and she wears Beskar armor. So just that alone makes her a formidable opponent to anybody that is a Jedi or wielding a lightsaber. So that's kind of an important note. It plays into this story a little bit later. But yeah, ruthless, twisted, sick. These again, all these fine qualities that you find in the Nihil, she's made of it. So, and this plays into the Eye of Darkness, and again, won't spoil that. But yeah, that relationship, it's kind of cool to kind of see the birth of this relationship, and then just it leaves you wondering like, so what more is there to come? Which I would expect in the next series, that Broken Blade series. I have a feeling she's just going to be a part of it, right? She's going to be bobbing in and out of any stories from here on out because it just feels like they've just got that much history with them.
Yeah, I think that's a sound theory for sure.
Yeah. Now, something about this comic book is it has like the main present day story, right? Present day set during phase 2, if you will, that time period, right? But then it also has flashbacks, and these flashbacks take place. The very first one takes place the moment that Porter Engle meets Barash Sylvain, and I think it's like the first day of training, lightsaber training, and it flashes back. I think maybe 4 times in total between all 4 issues of the series. But the way we're going to try to do this is we're going to talk about the flashbacks because what it does is really establish that relationship between Porter Engle and Barash, and then at the very end we'll kind of tie it all together because what happens in the past has a huge impact on what happens in the present here. So I want to start. Let's talk about Sylvain, Barash Sylvain. Throughout this comic book, he's always referring to her as his sister. Now, they're of 2 different species, which I never really even put 2 to. When I first read this, I'm like, wait a minute, this is very confusing. I hope they explain it. And they do. They do explain exactly why they're considered brother and sister. They're not, of course, of birth brother and sister. But we learned that earlier on because of her race, which I think is, I don't know if it's Kage or Kage. I don't know. It's spelled Kage. I've never heard it phonetically said, but
Yeah.
we'll call it Kage. But
I assumed Cage, but you never
it reads as
know.
Cage, yeah. But because she's Cage, and a little bit in in the comic book, she at one point when she's really young, she mentions that I am Cage. People from our planet remember our memories begin almost from birth, so they can remember all of their memories from birth, right? So you think about that, how much of that is lost, and when you think about what the Jedi Order does in taking babies and removing them from their families. By the time they get to, their youngling stage or even their Padawan stage, they've been so far removed from their families that they've kind of lost that, right? They're not yearning as much. Although we definitely have instances where folks are still yearning, right? But for them, it's not an easy disconnect, right? It's very difficult, and she's still holding on to this idea of family, to this idea of belonging to a family, and because of that, her and Porter Engle at a very young age have this kind of a natural connection, right? I'm not going to call it a dyad in the Force, but they have this natural connection to one another. And so they make a vow. That's probably not the right word given the context of this episode. They make a pact, right? That, hey, from now on, you're my brother, you're my sister. And throughout the entire relationship, it does feel like it is brother and sister. I can't tell you how many times I wanted to ship them when they were talking in the
I
main
know.
comic.
We were prevented from shipping. Yeah.
Right. And that's fine. It would get weird. I mean, Luke and Leia did it, but whatever. But so they have a very unique relationship. So I guess your thoughts on their relationship, and maybe kind of talk about what her abilities are and some of what is she good at.
Well, something that stood out to me about their relationship too is that she was kind of like you were saying, because she's still holding on to her family. She starts off as kind of a loner. I almost kind of got the idea that maybe she was afraid to get too close to anyone at the beginning because I forget exactly what it is that Porter says to her, but when he approaches her and starts talking to her, she's acting like she doesn't need friends. She doesn't need to be close to people. And he's like, sure, you need friends. Like, it's fun to have friends. And he kind of brings her out of her shell a little bit, and she does let him in, and they do connect, even though she's a little resistant to it at first. And so I think that's speaking to that persistence that we were talking about with Porter earlier, of just like continuing to try until he gets through. And also the fact that Barash is very particular with who she gets close to, but once you're in with her, you are in, because she's the one that asked him, will you be my brother? So I mean, she definitely views this as like a lifelong solid family relationship, even though she was reluctant to allow herself to feel that way at first.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's just kind of how she starts off. But this does lead me to a question, what you were asking me about what she's good at. So at one point, this is a quote that really stood out to me. Porter is talking about Barash, and he says, "I'm no wizard. I leave all that to my sister. I'm something else." So I found that interesting because it kind of speaks to how exactly they fit together. They both have kind of two different roles, but I thought it was interesting that he's referring to her as a wizard and then himself as something else. So if Barash is the wizard, what do you think Porter is, like, in reference to that? Like, is he the opposite of a wizard?
I think he's the warrior, to use a similar term. Like, he's definitely the warrior. I mean, he is known as the Blade for a specific reason. There's so many examples where we see his expertise and his prowess when it comes to using lightsabers and even dual wielding lightsabers at that. So I think that's what he's speaking to. And I almost took that as, and you know, in the comic book, they actually kind of allude to this. I think when they're doing one of the flashbacks, some of the older Jedi Knights are talking about how well they complement each other. They're almost a yin and yang, where she is very strong in what I would say the non-physical, non-combat type stuff. He definitely excels in it, right? He's probably not as good. The way I interpret this is he's probably not as good as some of the other stuff, right? The being able to read people's minds or persuade people. She's very talented in that regard. And we see examples of that. We're actually gonna talk about him. I think, I'll just talk about it right now. In this story, there are a couple of instances where her force ability is such that she's able to read their minds almost, right? They never explicitly say this, but she relies on the force to tell her whether or not people are telling the truth, right? What are their true intentions? What are their true motivations? This plays a huge part later on when they're trying to get to the bottom of this conflict that's happening between these two lands, which they're called out to go investigate. So yeah, I would say that he's the muscle where she's the brain in this relationship. But with and to kind of go back to the flashbacks too, at some point the Jedi Order is like, this has to stop. Like, these guys, I mean, they're acting like family. This is not good. This is a very deep attachment. They're becoming very emotionally attached as brother and sister, even though they're not. And so they actually take them and they separate them for a period of time. And these kids realize that, okay, well, we got to get back together because I need you, right? I can't be alone without you. And so they both come up with this idea that they're going to fake how bad they are at doing Jedi stuff. And they don't really get into a lot of the details in terms of what happens, but at some point the Jedi Order is like, okay, we really have to put them together. Like, for whatever reason, you just have to go with it. They finally come to the conclusion, we got to get them back together.
They're meant to be a team.
They were meant to be a team. And then from that point on, they acted as a team. It's a very interesting concept too, because they never mention like their masters, if they ever had any. What did that look like, having a brother and a sister together, or were they set to just set out on their own as just these two? Or did they have, them together with two masters and the four of them always went somewhere because they couldn't keep those two separated? Never got into any of that stuff, but it does really ask a lot of questions about their relationship. And that's important a little bit later, right? It's important. I think it's going to play more. There's going to be more importance into that probably in the next series. So,
yeah.
I want to go to, there's some questions in the chat. Dwayne Moore. Hey, Dwayne, thanks for being with us. Said, so the characters in Blade will be in Eye of Darkness. Yes, some of the characters, we're in spoiler territory at this point, but General Weiss and Porter Engle, you can expect those guys in Blade of Darkness, or Eye of Darkness. Sorry, not Blade of Darkness.
Too many similar words.
Too many words. Porter was also in Phase 1, which book and/or comic book? He was in Phase 1, Light of the Jedi. He was in The Rising Storm, and I think he didn't have a huge role in the Starlight Beacon one. I'm trying to remember if
Falling
he was.
Star.
Yeah, but I was trying to remember. Sorry, yeah, Falling Star. But I was trying to remember how much of a role he had. He was definitely in that. He was also in some comics. I think the Great Soup Cook-Off series, that was kind of the fun thing that Daniel Jose Older did as well. He's popped up in the comics from here and there. Let's see. This guy says Porter was in more than one of the books in Phase 1. Yeah, he says I'm gonna have to go reread some of that, listen to the audiobooks. Good stuff. He's a great character, and we're gonna get into exactly why here in just a second. Okay, so let's do this. We've got in the time that we got left, what I want to do is kind of talk about all the major plot points that are happening in all four issues, and we'll kind of get into. So we're going to actually break down this story now. So again, if you don't want to listen to this or watch this, go read it and then come back and you can hear our commentary. But I think it's worth definitely going reading. And it opens up on this planet called Bone World, which it's very funny. Like this is the first of many gotchas. Like you see Porter Engle and he's like floating knives in front of him, and you're thinking, holy crap, he's in combat, right? And he's not. He's actually making soup of all things. And this is kind of a running joke in all of the series, especially in the comics, about what he's doing and how great of a chef he is. Like he's a renowned chef as far as the Jedi Order is concerned. But we'll get the total opposite here. We get to see him making soup for somebody, and he serves the soup, and the guy's like, holy crap, this is terrible. And he's like, yeah, well, I'm not very good yet, right? That confidence kicks in, like, I'm not bad yet. I'm not good yet. And there's a moment there at the very beginning too, when he's kind of meditating, talking to himself, psyching himself up to make the soup. I know this sounds silly, but trust me, it's poignant. He says, you are not alone. The Force is always with you. The very end of this, I don't know if you caught this, but the very last line in this comic is when Barash leaves, she says, you are not alone. The Force is always with you. It's the exact same words that are happening here. But this concept of who is he when he is alone? I think that's what's probably going to get explored now going into that second series, because they did a really good job of establishing that these two have to be together. And when they are together, they are a force, no pun intended, to be reckoned with. They are pretty powerful. So any thoughts on that before we move into the first conflict?
Well, the soup scene had me laughing because at first I was like, oh, he's about to make this amazing soup. Like, look at this knife work. And then the soup was bad. And then I was like, wait, did he do it on purpose? It wasn't an accident. Like, I couldn't figure out what happened. And then he said the thing about, oh, okay, I'm not very good at it yet. So again, that's the persistence thing. He was horrible at it at first, but he kept doing it. And then by the time we get to phase 1, he's amazing at it.
Yeah. Riley's here. Hey, Riley. Thanks for being here. So they leave the restaurant. Barash is sitting there and she's like, Porter, we got to go. Like, she's all business. Like, Porter is, kind of, he's over the top. He's extroverted in a lot of ways, and she's much more reserved. Again, all business. But she tells Porter, hey, we got to get out of here. There's something going on outside. And before he leaves, he grabs a couple of sabak cards, or sabak cards, depending on when you grew up. He grabs some sabak cards and he's holding them in his hand. They get out there and there's these two groups of people and they're kind of in a confrontation. And to kind of cut to the chase, one group is saying, hey, they took our minerals that we were working, mining in some area not too far away from here. And the other group is saying, no, we didn't take them. These are ours. We just happened to walk into their territory with them, and they think that we stole them. And what happens from there is, there's a very common theme with Porter Engle. I think you mentioned it, but he does not want to fight. Like, he's very adamant about never having to fight. In fact, they don't want anybody to die. And they say this a few times in a lot of different ways throughout all 4 of these issues, that they truly are Jedi at heart. They don't want people to fight. They don't want death. They don't care if it's death, justified death, or just, wanton death. None of that should ever happen. And so they go to extreme measures to ensure that doesn't happen. And the entire time they're kind of talking to these folks and trying to get a feel for what's really happening, right? Get to the bottom of what's going on. He's floating those sabak cards, in the air, kind of right above his head. And when things really come, push to shove, the guys, 2 of them, there's these 2 Twi'leks, and they have their blasters out, and they open fire on Porter Engle. And they do a really good job of graphically, the artists do a good job of kind of showing you, but he is so fast that he deflects all of those bolts in kind of one fell swoop, and then redirects them into the floating cards above his head, right? It's almost like a party trick of sorts, right? And it's got everybody so astonished, except Barash. He's not really impressed. But everybody stops because they're like, whoa. And he says as much, like, if I just did that, you guys really don't want to know what comes next, right? And so they lay down their arms, and this is the first time then that Barash suddenly gets a read. Like, she starts reading the peoples through the Force, and she determines that the people that said that they were just walking onto the land and they already had this rare mineral that's on this planet, she determines through the Force that they are telling the truth. And they tell the other folks to leave. And they end up doing. But that's kind of the first. And it's a nice little introductory because you get to learn more about how good Porter Engle is with his lightsaber. And you also get to learn where Barash's strengths are in being able to kind of read people through the Force and understand their true intentions and if they're lying and that kind of thing. So I guess your thoughts on that scene.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and how they team up too. They help each other out to solve the same issue. Like she does part of it, he does the other part, and then they get to a resolution that way. But I mean, something else that I like about Porter, and I feel like this scene was hinting at it, but we see more examples of this later in the series, is that he doesn't want to use violence like you were saying, but I get the sense that even from this first scene, if it was required, he would be willing to do it. And I feel like that is something that's a little bit different than I remember when I was reading phase 1, there were times that I was like, "Oh my god, please just kill this guy." Like like why are we still being pacifists about this? Like these people don't deserve it.
Yep.
Porter doesn't give me that I like that type of idea. To me, he seems very much like if people are not if people are not playing along and they're being a danger, then he is willing to do what's done, but he just really wants to first make sure that it's actually necessary. So I really like how he's able to do both sides. He's not being excessive, but he's also not being a pushover either, and he's not letting dangerous people just get away with whatever they want.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And he's very consistent in this series throughout all of it. Every one of the confrontations that he has, and he has a number of them. He's very consistent in that regard. So from here, they decide they're going to go to, and this was a neat concept. I don't remember if this had ever come up before in any of the High Republics, but apparently back then, if you had, you needed help from the Jedi Order, you would go to this like petition desk and you would basically fill out a claim, a request for the Jedi to come out and help. And the Jedi would go to these things and they would just kind of pick and choose like, oh, they've got all these people, they're looking for work. And so they go to this petition desk and they find their next job, if you will, as Jedi that are wandering in the very far outskirts of the galaxy. And it reads, a local dispute. A fortress city is besieged by an army from a rival faction. They have requested Jedi assistance to break the siege and end the conflict. Seems pretty simple, pretty straightforward, so complex, so dramatic when we finally get to the bottom of what's going on there. But yeah, there's this town. It's under siege by another rival place, and the Jedi have been asked to kind of help one of the groups to find, make peace and send these guys away from what they're doing. They don't have a transport, which I thought was interesting. They don't have a ship to fly around in, and so they end up hitching a ride with some Pathfinders. So as a refresher, the Pathfinders during the High Republic era are these people that are wandering around the outskirts of town or outskirts of the galaxy, and they're setting up these communication relays, right? This is how eventually, hundreds of years later, when we get to the time of like Star Wars movies and everything that we've all known in the last 40 years of our real life, the way the whole galaxy communicates is because of the work that these guys, these Pathfinders, are doing. They're also finding hyperspace routes, and they're really, this is in the great age of exploration of the galaxy. So on top of the communication piece, they also are mapping safe routes for hyperspace travel, and this eventually gets into the astromech droids and et cetera, right? So they hitch a ride with them. I think one of the Pathfinders, or one of the people on this ship, he's a Jedi. This is what we talked about earlier, where he sees Porter Engle and he's like, wow, I've heard a lot about you. I used to be number one in high school. I can't wait to fight you, kind of thing. And then, Porter Engle pretty much, pulls a fast one on him, and he, of course, doesn't stand a chance. But the other quick takeaway, and I'll see if you want to add anything, is the planet that they're heading to is called Gansivor. Gansivor is so far out there are no communications. So once you get there, because relays haven't been set up, the only way that you can communicate with other people in the galaxy is you have to use an EX droid. Now the EX droid becomes a pretty pivotal, I wouldn't say critical, but definitely a pivotal, I wouldn't say MacGuffin, I don't know what the right term is, but it does come up in Eye of Darkness as well. So it was kind of nice to see the callback to the EX droids, to actually see what they look like. And then because it becomes an important part a little bit later. But those droids are used to communicate with other people in the galaxy. The way it works is the EX droid takes whatever communication you want. It then travels to the closest satellite relay, sends it there, and then it comes back to you. So think about it as like, the Pony Express of sorts.
I was just about to say, it's like the mail.
It's like the mail, right? Yeah. It's the only way that people can communicate that far out there. But this planet that they're going to, this Gansivor planet, there's absolutely no communication. It is out in the middle of nowhere, and left to their own kind of devices as far as how they communicate and how they resolve conflict. Anything you want to add, or do you want to just get into Gansivor? And that ends issue 1, by the way. That's the first issue in a nutshell.
Let's get into issue 2. I feel like You hit the nail on the head.
All right, so Gansevoor now is the planet we're going to. The capital city is called Horatio. That was kind of a weird name, but okay. At some point, they ran out of names because some of these names are so far out
Right.
there. No shade on Charles Soule because I thought he did a great job with the story. But this planet is called Gansevoor. It's also known as the planet of knives, which has a significance later down the road. I think earlier on, I think it's Porter or maybe it's Barash who says, "Oh, surely it's named Planet of Knives because of the mountain range." And she's like, "Yeah, sure, if you want to believe that, go right
Right.
ahead."
Yeah.
But it's kind of a cutthroat, if you will, planet.
Mm-hmm.
And so they meet up with this envoy Celine, I think is her name, and she's the one that put the petition in, right? So think of her as kind of like the ambassador for that the land that she's representing. They're the ones under siege. This land is called Firevale. And to really make a long story short, Firevale is known for mining this really rare mineral that is used as currency throughout the galaxy, right? It's how this planet really makes all of its money and profit. But it only comes from this particular land called Firevale. A rival land called, what's the name?
Bethune.
Bethune. Yeah. Bethune has them under siege. And what she's asking Porter and Barash to do is to take some much needed supplies because they've been under siege. There's been nobody going in and out of that land for however long it's been now. They want them to deliver a number of goods to them and also get to the bottom and figure out a way to make these guys go away. So their land's not under siege. And of course, they take this on. But she's very clear. I want your thoughts on this. Barash, throughout all of this, is very consistent. She's not quick to make a decision, right? She really wants, she hears everybody. She understands what people are asking her to do, but she's not somebody to react on that. She wants to go find out for herself firsthand, using the Force to understand truly what's happening, and really at the end of the day, find out who's lying, who's telling the truth, and only then will they take action on one thing or another.
Yeah. Well, and there's a key line too that's repeated multiple times throughout this, which is some variation of like, "Are you certain?" "I am certain." Like she's always talking about if she's
Yeah.
certain or not. And if she's not certain, she doesn't make any recommendations and she doesn't take any action. So, I mean, certainty is pretty much like a key value for her. And if she doesn't have that, then she doesn't proceed. And she's going to do whatever she needs to do. She's going to talk to whoever she needs to talk to until she is certain.
Right. And when she said that, going back to when she says, "I'm certain," it almost is like her saying, "The Force has spoken to me and I know this to be true." Right?
Yes. Like
And
there is no doubt in my mind.
there's no doubt in my mind.
Straight from the Force. Yeah.
And that's where she falls. This is where she fails at the very end, right? We'll get into that here a little bit. She doesn't do this, even though she's very consistent about it throughout the comic book. When it comes to the very end of it and kind of what leads to the Barash vow, she didn't do this. And there's a reason. We'll get into that here in just a little bit. Okay, so they end up flying in, like literally flying on these birds or whatever, because I guess there's no transport ship or whatever to get the supplies there. As they get close to where the siege is happening, the Bethunians, they go ahead and they fire off these missiles at them. And Porter and Barash use the Force and they redirect the missiles, right? So they're able to stop those. And there's a lot of them, and these are huge, right? So it's not a small feat. But I think it's Barash or Porter says, "Okay, pull us back. We're way too close. We'll just go in on foot." They go in on foot. And when they meet up with this army that is sitting outside the gates of Firedale, we get to see firsthand Porter Engle in action, because immediately they open fire. And words aren't going to do justice, but if you imagine like what Anakin Skywalker went up against in the Clone Wars, and just this barrage of blaster bolts being fired at you, and you just see this whirlwind of blade everywhere, and he's deflecting bolts. I mean, he's so good that he's not only is just the sheer amount of blaster bolts that he's able to deflect, but the accuracy of hitting them back at their targets and disarming them. Like he's firing them back at their blasters, and the blasters are flying out of their hands. I mean, he's literally disarming an entire army. And Barash, I don't even think Barash is doing anything. I think she's just standing there. But he's
Yeah.
so good that
She's
he's
standing
able
there
to,
with her arms crossed.
yeah. I mean, the entire time. And he's like talking to them about like, "Hey, you're no match for what we're doing." And they finally lay down their arms. And so they ask, "Okay, take us to whoever's running the show here." They meet up with somebody named Marshall. I think it's Tozin. I forget that if I got that right. But this Marshall Tozin guy, he's kind of like the head Bithorian that is running the siege. He's in charge of the siege. And we get his side of the story, right? The first side of the story. Now, his side of the story is that the reason why they're besieging Firevale is because Firevale stole the Bithorian princess, right? So they kidnapped her. They took her against her will. She's there behind the gates, and all we're trying to do is get back our princess. That's the only reason we're here, right? And it sounds very noble and seems, but again, Barash is like, okay, I heard you. I need to go into there now. I need to go into Firevale and I need to figure out what's going on. They're like, heck no, you're not going in there, right? You're not taking these supplies in there. We're not going to let you go in there or whatever. And then, Porter Engle kind of flexes at that point and says, look, what are you going to do? You can't stop us. It's in your best interest since you don't want to die and we don't want to kill. You should just go ahead and let us get in. And it's enough, right? I mean, he's done enough. He's displayed enough and we're kind of cutting over a lot of it, but he's done enough to really get to Marshall Tozin. And Marshall's like, okay, fine, whatever. Just go and you'll find out for yourself what's going on. So they get in. I'll pause right there because now we're going to get the Firevale version of the story here. But anything you want to add there?
I mean, this Marshall, from the beginning, though, I mean, even though Porter did really display that, he can back up what he's saying, this Marshall still was not very trustworthy. I mean, he lets them do what they want to do because he has no choice, but you kind of get the vibe that, is he actually, like, where is his heart actually with this? Like, even though he has this really good reason of they kidnapped the princess, he still doesn't really seem like he's being entirely truthful. At least that was the impression I was getting as I was reading this. So even though he has a strong claim, something still doesn't feel right here.
And credit to you, because I didn't pick up on that. Like a little bit later when we get his deception, I guess if you want to call it that, it took me completely by surprise. I just kind of took it at face value. It was like, okay, he at least he thinks he's, I felt like he was telling the truth, honestly. But to your point, when you go back after it and you read it again, you look at it, you're like, okay, yeah, this guy is kind of shady, and he wasn't, he was speaking in half truths in some instances.
Well, and I think one reason I didn't believe him from the start is because, like, they're talking about the resources, and I was kind of like, that's what I thought was going to happen. I was like, it's all about resources. They just want the resources.
Right.
This princess is just like a noble lie to get the resources. So I still was wrong, but
yeah.
I mean,
yeah, I can see that. I can see where I think Charles Soule was trying to send you one way with that path. And like I said, that was cool about this story. Again, this is one of several instances where you think you got it figured out, or at least you have a hunch, and it doesn't turn out to be the case, which is always interesting, right?
Yeah.
All right, so they finally get into Firevale, right? So they get into Firevale, they get through the gates, they unload the supplies, everybody's super happy that they're there, and then they meet with the queen of Firevale and her son. And so the queen is Queen Kieran, and the son is Prince Colden. And we learn that the princess is indeed in Firevale, but she was not kidnapped. She actually was married to the Prince of Colden. The dun dun dun, super drama,
voluntarily,
right?
Not even in arranged marriage or anything.
I know. This is on her own free will. She fell in love with Prince Colden. It was like Romeo and Juliet, right? Star-crossed lovers. They couldn't be together because they were from rival lands, but they decided that they were going to be together, and so the safest place that she felt she could go was to Firevale. And we'll get a little bit more here in a little bit later, but that's why they're there. And so now you're thinking, oh, well, God, it's a story about love, right? How could you get in the way of this story? And how can anybody come between them at this point? And it's at that moment that suddenly they are under attack. So we find out immediately right there that that's the reason they were married. And then suddenly they're being attacked by the army that's just hasn't been attacking them. They've been just outside the gates. And this is the very end of issue 2, and we find out that the Bithorians have now hired some mercenaries to come in, and it is a lot of mercenaries. Like you look at the image, and it looks like a massive, I don't know, platoon, if you will, right? There's just tons of people that have showed up. They have these huge tanks now that they've got there to start bombarding the city if they need to. And of course, the person leading this mercenary group is none other than General Weiss. And this is our first appearance of General Weiss. We see her come out. She's the Merlin. She's got the Beskar armor on. She's got her spear, and it ends right there. So now they're technically being attacked by not only the Bethurians, but now this mercenary group as well that's been hired to kind of force them out. And that's issue 2. Anything else you want to add to that? Or do you want to roll? Oh, I want to talk about the or General Weiss. She comes out and her first words are, who am I here to kill?
That was going to be what I was about to add. Yeah, she makes quite an impression.
Yeah, like she's just coming out guns blazing, like, and she's consistent. Like she's, like you said, she's very nihil in that regard. She loves this idea of just killing people, and I don't know, she's very dark, very twisted, like we said earlier on.
Well, and there's one conversation that we see where she's talking with the marshal that hired her, and she's trying to bargain with him about what they're going to do next. And he's like, I'll let you plunder the city for an hour. And she's like, I want to plunder it for 12 hours. And I'm like, this is so messed up.
Right.
Like the fact that this is even the conversation, like I'm laughing because it's just so like extreme, but it's actually, I mean, that's the type of person she is. It's just like horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of like 2 hours, she jumps immediately to 12. Like, no, I've done this many times, and I know 12 hours is what I'm going to need to get, what I want and what I need.
Yeah.
So.
Scary.
Sorry. Let's move into issue number 3. So the mercenaries start attacking, and then Barash tells Porter, hey, go deal with that. Like, she stays there because she wants to stay there and kind of learn more. I think at this point, she really wants to talk to the princess now and kind of get the princess's side of the story. And when that happened, when they said, oh, I married her, I thought, because at first he's like, oh, I don't want to bother her. Right. The Prince Colden is saying, I don't want to bother the princess. She's been through a lot. She's somewhere else right now. And I thought, oh, okay, no, they've got her hidden, or, she was married against her will or something. It's just kind of really suspicious that she's not there with them. And so, and I think Barash was picking up on this as well. And so she decides to stay back and tells Porter, hey, go deal with this entire armada of people that have shown up now. And he's like, okay, sure. And he just jumps off the wall and then lands down there. And again, I can't explain this. This is the more of the action, right? The big twofold pages of what Porter Engle's doing on this. But I mean, he's, again, deflecting bolts. He's redirecting missiles that are being shot at him. And then General Weiss comes out, and they try to. I think they want, at this point, they're trying to negotiate basically a ceasefire is what he's trying to do. But they're all of course attacking him at this point. Okay, so while that's going on, we come back over to Barash, and now she's actually met the princess. So she goes to the princess. This princess's name is Princess Sakara or Sakarta. Sakatra, that's what it was, Princess Sakatra. And the princess reveals that the reason she ran off from that planet was because she was in love with Prince Colden. So she confirms that, yes, they are in love. So this wasn't against her will, but she was pregnant and she had a baby with him. Like, ooh, more drama.
That's the telenovela moment.
That's the novella moment.
And
right
there's
there.
a baby.
And there's a baby. And of course, so when Barash hears this, on top of that, she says, look, if they found out, if my kingdom found out that I had the baby inside of me, that the father was, Prince Colden of this rival kingdom, they would take the child away from me. All right. They would take me away from her, and then they would give this baby to somebody else. And it's in that moment that she gets to Barash, because to go back to what we said earlier, Barash was so connected to her family, and she was still feeling that trauma of being separated from her family when she was so young. And because this girl was speaking to her heart, she immediately makes this decision that, okay, she's telling the truth, right? There's no doubt in my mind that she's telling the truth, but she doesn't rely on the force. She doesn't say, I'm certain of it. She's just caught up in this emotional story of a mother who potentially would lose their child, and that child would live a life without their family forever, that she makes a decision right then and there on the spot that, okay, this is the right way to go. Like, we need to stick with this Fire Veil group. We need to tell the other guys to leave. They don't need to be here. And Porter Engle's going to, of course, take care of all that. But I guess your thoughts on her little story there, her sad story that she has.
Well, she becomes so concerned with we have to save this baby, that she doesn't stop and ask herself, does the princess does the story that I'm being told sound reasonable? Like, does the story sound true? Do I feel in the force that this story is true? She doesn't really think about any of that. It's just her concern immediately becomes about this hypothetical baby that's going to get taken away from the parents, that she just kind of forgets about everything else and just goes with that.
Yeah. And while that's happening, meanwhile, Porter eventually gets them to kind of lay down their arms yet again, saying, "Look, I'm more powerful than any of you guys, even all of you guys. So there's no really point here." He does make his way back to kind of like the command control center for this group. So here he meets General Weiss and meets up again with Marshal Tolson, or whatever his name is, the guy that's leading the Bethurian forces. And in those conversations, he's like, "Look, I just need you to hold off. I'm not saying, just cease fire for a little bit. My sister is in there. She's trying to get to the bottom of all of this. We need to give her some time." And General Weiss is like, "No, I want to fight." And eventually they get through to her and she's like, "Okay, whatever. I'm getting paid either way. So I'll just, she concedes and everything's fine. There's a nice ceasefire." However, once Barash knows now that they need to go away because, the fire veil is in the right here, at least as far as she's concerned, she tells Porter Engle, "Okay, tell them to now leave." Of course, they don't like this at all. They hate this idea. They don't want to leave.
I was like, why didn't you start with that?
Right, yeah.
Let's just try telling them to leave.
Yep.
Skip all this.
And of course, she doesn't do that. I mean, she's like, Porter Engle's outside, I think her ship or whatever. And so what does she do? She does what any normal, level-headed person does. She grabs a rocket launcher and then fires a rocket at Porter Engle, who's standing there. Like, Porter Engle's not even, he's off on the side. He's kind of doing his own thing, just waiting like everybody else. And she comes out with this rocket launcher and fires it at Porter Engle. And suddenly there's a big explosion. All hell breaks out, right? They start firing again back up on the city, and everyone's freaking out in Firevale, like, holy crap, we're being attacked now, except Barash. Barash is like, "Nope, don't worry. I know this looks really bad, but this is all part of it. Porter Engle's out there. He's going to finish it." And the issue ends with him literally walking out of this explosion, like the dust that was still in the air, completely unscratched. I don't know how he survived, but he did. He's just that good, I guess. And he says, "Fine, we'll do it this way," in terms of like, okay, if you're not going to leave by me asking you, then we're going to get physical at that point. So that ends issue 3. But it was a really cool way. I mean, it's a pretty badass moment for Porter Engle there at the very end to be able to kind of walk away from that and not have a scratch on him.
Maybe he deflected it with his lightsaber again.
I know. They do it a few times in this series.
Deflect a whole missile with a lightsaber.
Yep. Yeah. It probably would happen because there was a big explosion. So. All right, so we get into the final issue here. So Porter comes out of the ashes, he's completely unharmed, and then he confronts General Weiss. And so we see them get to fight firsthand, but it's not much of a fight. Like, she pulls out her spear, and I think they take a couple swings at her, but he's really quick to disarm her. And we learn, she's kind of touting at this point too, right before she's touting that she was, "I'm a Jedi killer." She's got the Beskar armor on. She has the Beskar spear. She looks pretty menacing. But Porter Engle says something really interesting. He says, "I have 2 things to say to, her saying that she's a Jedi killer." He says, "I have 2 things to say. First, your name. I will never forget. No matter what happens here, even if you escape, your name, I will always remember, General Weiss. And second, you may have fought members of my order, but you have never fought me." Like, again, it's like so confident that it's cocky almost, right? It borders on that cockiness, but he's so like level-headed about it, and he's so sure of himself, and he backs it up every single time.
If you can back it up, then you're just speaking the truth, I guess.
Right. And so they get into this skirmish. It doesn't even last but a few seconds. I mean, he immediately disarms her, and of course she's a spoiled loser, right? So what does she do? Again, what any normal level-headed person does is she pulls a grenade and lobs it at him and everybody else around him. He uses the force. He deflects. He sends the grenade off into the air before it hits him and the people around him. It explodes. And at that point, she tells everybody to attack, right? And so they're all of her mercenaries are now firing upon Porter Engle. And the entire time, again, he's deflecting this just barrage and wave after blaster bolts from all these mercenaries. And the entire time back up on Firevale, they're like, what is Porter Engle going to do? Like, how can he even do this? And Barash says, well, he knows mercenaries really well, and he's going to hit them where it hurts the most, which is in the pocketbooks. And so rather than fighting the minions, the peons that are firing at him that really can't hurt him, he goes and attacks the really expensive heavy armor, like the tanks, if you will, that they brought in. And with the thinking here is that if he destroys enough of those, because they're mercenaries, this is no longer going to be a profitable battle, right? This is not a profitable job for them. And so they're naturally just going to pick up and go. And eventually that's what happens. I mean, he takes up, at one point, he lifts one of those tanks up with the force, and then force crushes the entire tank. So we're at that level in terms of how incredibly powerful Porter Engle is when he's in combat. He takes off enough of these tanks. General Weiss then gives the command that, hey, look, we'll come back to that. He's starting to take out the tanks. Because it's at this moment now that they start lobbing missiles over the wall, destroying the city. So originally that wasn't the deal. The deal was they were supposed to just break the wall, get the princess, and then get out of here. But because General Weiss is so mad, she decides that she's going to, on her own will, she just starts opening fire on the city, right? So they're destroying the city. The Bithurian guy suddenly is like, hey, wait a minute, this is not what we agreed to, right? You're destroying the city. You're going to level it. That's not what we wanted here. And of course, she does what any level-headed person would do. She then shoots that guy and kills him. So she kills the Bithurian Marshal Tolzin, in cold blood, and is basically, look, no one's out here. There are no communications. You guys are going to get blamed for all of this. So, you know, what's there? So she basically kills the command head of the Bithurians at that point. And while the city's being destroyed, everybody's freaking out. The Fire Veil folks are completely freaking out now because everything's blowing up and being destroyed. And this is when we get the next novella moment here, where the princess is running out. The queen's there, the princess is there, Prince Colden is there, and Barash is there. And there's something like when Princess Sakatra realizes that the city's being destroyed, she has this kind of freak out moment. Like, and I forget the wording, but you realize that something's not right. Like, this is like, she's talking about, what was it, Lauren? She talks about like, hey, this wasn't supposed to happen, or, you know, something, there was something just not right with the plan. I guess there was a plan is what we realize at this point.
Well, and first we see her, she has a little comm in her like bracelet.
Yeah.
Before the marshal is killed, where she talks, well, after he's shot, before he actually dies, she calms him and is like, this wasn't the plan. And that's when us as the reader is like, oh my God, like, what did this lady do? And after that, that's when it all just kind of starts to fall apart. So like we get this little hint of her talking with the marshal. She realizes that the reason that the comm ended is because the marshal's dead. And then she just kind of comes apart because her plan is just going to pieces and a bunch of people are dying because of it. And at this part, I was like, it is no surprise that this plan came apart. This is a way too complicated plan. Like what? Like I had to read this part a couple times because I was like, okay, so she said this and then he told him. Like I was like, I couldn't even follow it. That of course this plan went wrong because this was just like way too convoluted from the beginning. But that's when she when she comes to pieces, we find out that her and Colden, they just kind of cooked this whole thing up together. And it also eventually comes out that there is no baby. They were just trying to get the throne from Colden's mother, the queen.
Yeah. That moment when she says that, the plan was they got married and they knew that they would never be able to kind of take over the land because the queen was in place. So they felt like, okay, we'll get married. We'll stay here. We'll tell the rest of the Bithurians to besiege this city. That will force the queen to have to step down, right, from her power. And then once she steps down, which they never explained if they would like lock her up or whatever, but once she stepped down, then Princess Sakatra and Prince Colden would then be in power at that point. They would come back into power and they would kind of rule over this now new territory of Bithurian and Firevale, right? That was the plan. Yeah. And they would have control of all of the in and outgoing of this rare mineral that's super, expensive and used as currency on the planet. Right?
So I guess it was sort of about resources in the end.
It was. I mean, it was kind of a nice to have, I guess, maybe. I don't know. But
yeah.
And so when you find out like that, you're like, oh, what? Like this, she's like the worst person in the world, this Princess Sakatra.
Well, it's just like
Because
an idiot because
yeah,
she obviously didn't. I mean, she does feel a lot of remorse. Like you can see that she's torn up about all the people that are dying, but it's like, what did you think was going to happen? You just staged a war, like
Yep.
for personal gain. Like that's horrible.
And on top of all that, the fact that she lied about the baby to Barash, and what happens is the queen gets really mad, of course. Queen Karen or whatever her name is. She gets really upset when she finds out that not only did Sakatra, betray her, but her own blood, her own son was in on this the entire time. Of course, she doesn't go after the son. She goes after Princess Sakatra, and she pulls out a knife in true form for, this planet of knives or whatever they're called, and is about to stab her. And that's when Barash says no. She uses the force. Like she uses the force. She stops the queen from killing the princess and says, think about the baby kind of thing, right? Don't do this. Think about the baby. And the prince is like, what baby? Like we said we weren't going to have a baby. We said we wouldn't consummate the marriage until, have a baby until we've consummated the marriage. And that's when she reveals like, oh yeah, well, there's really no baby. I just said that because, I figured that she would, listen to us more or whatever. And that's when you see it on Barash's face, like this face of gloom, like, holy crap. Because in her mind, a little bit later, and I know you've got some questions around this, in her mind at this point, she's almost reeling and lost because she feels like because she didn't trust in the Force and she made this decision purely based on emotions and her own trauma that she was experiencing by being detached from her family and the future of this poor child that was going to go through that same thing, that hundreds of people have died now, right? I mean, all the people that were out there fighting the mercenaries. And by this point out there, like the mercenaries, well, no, we'll get to that here in a little bit. But at the very end of all this, so many people have died that now she feels like she's responsible. Yeah, Princess Sakatra is ultimately responsible, but because she believed her and didn't trust in the Force or didn't feel connected enough to trust in the Force to make that decision about whether or not she was telling the truth, she now bears responsibility for all of these deaths, which again, like we said about at the very beginning of this and throughout this, they're so, and it's true of the Jedi during this order, they're just so adamantly against death of any kind. And suddenly now in a matter of, a few minutes here, hundreds of people are dead and she's now bearing that weight on her shoulders. So while that's going on, while that is happening, Sakatra decides that she's going to go out there and make a speech, right? So she stands out there on the wall and says, hey, my people, I'm sorry. The mercenaries are the really bad guys here. Please attack them. And of course they listen to her. So the Bithorian forces then suddenly turn on the mercenaries. And we have this huge battle that breaks out between the mercenaries and the Bithorians there. This is when General Weiss decides to book it, right? She gets in her ship and she takes off and she leaves, and we don't ever see her again in this comic. After all that's said and done, we have this really last moment here. It's like second to last moment where Porter Engle and Barash are kind of sitting down and they're talking about this. And this is where she says as much like, hey, I bear responsibility. This was my fault as much as it was Princess Sakatra's because I didn't listen to the Force. And I think it's time that I leave. And he's like, you're going to leave the Order? And she says, no, I'm not leaving the Order, but I can't fulfill the duties as a Jedi of the Jedi Order at this time. I need to go reconnect with the Force in some way. She says too many people have died. She decides that she wants to stay away from her duties, quote, until she is certain she understands again what the Force wants her to do. And you had this question in here about whether or not she was being too hard on herself. I think in some regards, yes. Like it doesn't feel, I don't know. I think if you buy into the idea that death is like the absolute worst thing, and suddenly all of that happened, and if she follows the dogma and the doctrine of emotions are bad, and I led with my emotions, and now look what's happened, I can see where she would want to, but I think it is still a little too much. Like it feels like Porter could have done more to persuade her not to go, or maybe have consulted with people like Yoda or I'm trying to think of the other guy that died. Oh, I don't want to say that. I'll spoil something right there.
Well, now you really can't say.
Now I can't say it.
I mean, it's High Republic. We know people are going to die.
Yeah, they're all dead, folks. Hate to break it to you. But yeah, I mean, that feels like she could have had some kind of consultation or met with some of the other members of the order to kind of before she made this decision, rather than sending Porter Engle as her ambassador to notify the Jedi Order of what she was going to do at that point. But what are your thoughts? Too harsh?
Yeah, I mean that was why I put this question in here is because when I was reading this, I was like, "Oh my gosh, like give yourself a break." Like, I mean, she's a person. I mean, like, yes, we shouldn't let emotions rule us, but she's still going to have them. And it was a particular thing that really affects her in a very sensitive way. And she really tried very hard to get the truth, and she was deceived. I mean,
Yep.
even though she didn't feel the force, she wasn't listening for it like she should have been. She was deceived by, the rulers of the city that was being sieged. And so, I mean, I understand why she has regret, and I understand why she feels like she could have done more in this situation, but she just takes the burden of all of it on her shoulders, even though it if her and Porter weren't there, I think things probably would have gone down the same way. Like, I don't think she made anything worse. I think she tried to fix something and just didn't succeed in fixing it.
Yeah.
So I felt really sorry for her because I felt like she did the best that she could in the situation. She has limitations just like anybody else does. And she's just like put herself into exile over it. And
Yep.
there is a scene where Porter is talking to her and he's basically saying that. He's like, "You did the best you could. We both did the best we could. Like, that's all we can do is try. And like, if people are going to be ugly to each other, then that's what they're going to do. And we just have to try." He says something to that
Yeah. No, you're
effect.
right. He does. He does try to
Yeah.
console her in that way.
Yeah, but it's not enough. Like, she's kind of already got her mind made up, and it's kind of one of those situations where somebody can say all the right things, but it just doesn't make you feel any better,
Yep.
you know?
Yep.
So I just really felt sorry for her. That was what I kept coming back to, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I think there are ways to justify it, but at the same time, it is almost a little too much. I mean, the good thing is we get the origin of the Barash vow, like we talked about, if nothing else. Her deciding to kind of take her exile. The very last part of this book is Porter Engle going to the Jedi Order. He notifies them of exactly what happened. He explains, she's not leaving. They're like, what? She's leaving the Order? And he's like, no, she's not leaving the Order, but she's just going to go take some time to go reconnect with the Force, and she'll come back once she's, whenever that may be. They all seem to kind of understand. I guess this is where the Barash vow word is. This is the first time that anybody's ever done this, as far as I'm concerned. Like they kind of led it to that, right? They kind of lead that this is the first time it's happened. This is why it's named the Barash vow. And then the very last panel is Porter Engle, and he's sitting behind the infamous tree that's there in the Jedi Temple, right? We all know the big tree that we always see them in Clone Wars, comic books. It's been in everything. But he's sitting there in front of that epic tree, and he's got his hood on. He looks a little bit darker. I don't know if it was just the way that was, illustrated, if there was any significance or symbolism of that. But I have a feeling there is some symbolism there, because if you think about it, they did such a good job. Charles Soule did a really good job of emphasizing just how connected they were, especially in the flashbacks. I know we didn't touch on a lot of that, but there were a lot of great moments in there as kids growing up in the Jedi Order where they were connected. We saw them and how well they worked together as Jedi, as adults, and just how incredibly efficient and powerful they were as a duel. And suddenly they're separated. And I just wonder now if we're going to get yet another dimension to Porter Engle. Like, I wonder if the next one's called the Broken Blade, right? And I think, okay, how, we think of, I mean, you can take it literally, but the broken blade leads me to think that he is broken. Like, the fact that she's no longer around, I don't know what that's
Yeah.
going to be like for him. How does he deal with all that, right? And they tell him, hey, we've got one more mission for you now. And they say, we're going to send you to the planet of Bordota. So we all know from phase 1 that Porter Engle's nickname is the Blade of Bordota. So it's really exciting that we're going to get that storyline. But I never thought that storyline was going to be a darker storyline. And I'm starting to wonder now if he's so broken that he's going to have a reputation for doing some horrible things because he's not, and I may be thinking too much about this, maybe not horrible things, but certainly not he may take a 180, and maybe he is more about, fighting first, or okay, a little bit easier with killing for a certain period of time. Maybe he goes to this dark period. It wouldn't be unprecedented. We've seen it with Elzar Mann already in the High Republic. We've seen it with some other Jedi. They certainly go through these. We saw it with Luke Skywalker. If you want to bring in, more recent elements or experiences, instances. So I could see him going down a darker path, because I just don't know how he's going to be able to function or be the same person he is without Barash around him. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I could see. I don't know if I'm sold on the darker path aspect, but I do anticipate that he's going to go through some turmoil of figuring out who he is without her. Also, I mean, one thing that they say in the flashbacks is that when they're deceiving their masters about getting separated, what they say to each other is, we're better together. Like, they genuinely do believe that they're worse when they're separated. They're just kind of milking it, but
Yep.
that is something that they truly believe. And so when she leaves, even though it's voluntarily rather than them being pulled apart, I think he is going to have to go through that of, how do I compensate for this part of me that is now missing? Like, I have some things that I've got to work on because I don't have my teammate who's able to pick up the slack in this area while I take care of business in this area. And I expect that that's going to be like a very tumultuous period for him.
Yep.
And that's what I think that image of him sitting under the tree with the dark hood over his head is kind of alluding to, is just like a very tough period of some very serious transformation and some really serious inner work that he's going to have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm in agreement there. And I think it's just exciting that we're going to get to see that origin of the Blade of Bordata and what exactly that means. Because, the first time you read that in Phase 1, you're like, wow, he's got a name. What the heck does that even mean? Right? And here we go. We're going to get that story finally. So Ruben Gutierrez is in the chat. It says, predictions for The Broken Blade. Would you prefer a second comic book story or a novel? I think I would always prefer a novel first, but I think Charles Soule has already kind of come out there and said they are working. I think it's the same team as far as I know as well. So they are working on a comic book series for The Broken Blade. I would expect it to be 4 issues. I mean, we just don't know enough about it, but I would expect, again, that to be out. Like we said at the very beginning of the episode, I expect that to come out probably next year, because we'll be amidst all of the High Republic Phase 3 hype, well deep in it at that point. But
yeah.
But yeah, overall, I thought it was a great story. It's got a lot of twists and turns, right? We made the joke, if you're into Mexican novellas, man, you're like, this is right up your alley, because there's just so many like, ooh, what are you going to do about that? Oh, I lied to you, and I'm sleeping with him now, and all that stuff.
Just one reveal after another, and each one is crazier than the last.
It's exactly right. That's exactly right. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining us on this breakdown walkthrough of The Blade. Hopefully you get a chance to go read it. It's still worth reading, even if you listen to this and watch the video. I definitely recommend going out there reading it, and certainly is going to, like we said, pay off for the Eye of Darkness. Some of the characters in here are going to pick up in that storyline. I think it just recontextualizes that relationship in some really cool ways. But also, before we go, thanks for everybody that joined us in the live chat. So Sky, Ash, Dwayne, I think you're new, first time here. So thank you so much. Riley, Music Train, and Ruben Gutierrez, and Jennifer just popped in. So thanks, Jennifer. Thanks for jumping in here last minute, or maybe you were here and we didn't know. Thanks for saying hi. Again, if you guys want to subscribe to the channel, head out to cantinacast.com/YouTube. Subscribe there. Just to re-emphasize and reiterate, Lauren has Eye of Darkness, her first. Is it a full spoiler? Sorry, I didn't hear that part.
It was a sneak peek. First video was the sneak peek. So I'm basically just giving you general impressions, general expectations, and what you need to read first.
Yep. But next week, though, do you have the full spoilery thing? Okay, that's going to be
next week is the full plot synopsis, full thoughts, spoilers, all that. Yeah.
Yep. And then also keep in mind that next week we are going to tackle Tales of Light and Life. So this is the All Jedi Walk Their Own Path story by Charles Soule. This will explain what happened to Buryaga during the Fallen Star. So we'll get into that. And then we've got a number of other episodes leading up to our final. Eventually we'll get around to, Lauren and I are going to come on here, and we're actually going to break down the Eye of Darkness in pretty great detail, more than what we used to do back during Phase 1. So if you're interested in all of that and looking forward to it, it's going to be much of the same. And it's just a great book. I can't wait to talk more about that. So, hey, Skywalker's Academy, thanks for being here, man. Glad you made it at the very end. All right, Lauren, any final thoughts or anything before we close up shop tonight?
Well, for fans of Loden Greatstorm, you also need to catch the short story All Jedi Walk Their Own Path that we're going to be covering. So, if you love Buryaga, you find out the fate of
True.
Buryaga. But if you love Loden, there's a lot of great Loden stuff in that one too.
Loden and Bell in that relationship, which I mean
Yeah.
is just pure gold.
That's
every time.
honestly, that's what really carried the story for me even more. So I'm excited to talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. Hopefully you guys can join us next week. And again, Lauren, thanks so much. Everybody else, thanks for being here. We'll see you guys here in just a few days.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.